Okay, we're recording now. I'm Meredith Farkas, president of ACRL-Oregon. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the rest of our webinar planning team for their help in getting this together. That's Sarah Rowland, Asia Betancourt-McCarthy, and Catherine Donaldson. I'd also like to thank our OLA Association Manager, Shirley Roberts, for her always invaluable support. After the session, probably Monday when the recording's been processed and is all ready, you'll receive an email with a link to the recorded session and also a session evaluation. We'd really appreciate it if you'd fill out the evaluation. This is a pilot offering, and the more information we get from our stakeholders, the better. Today's webinar is entitled Critical Library Management, which is a topic I think any of us, whether we have management responsibilities or just lead teams, can learn a lot from. Our presenters are Candise Branum, who's the Director of Library Services at the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine, and Molly Gunderson, who's the Access Services Manager at Portland State University. Candise is currently also our Vice President of ACRL-Oregon, and Molly was recently an ACRL-Oregon board member. They're both going to present and then take questions towards the end of the hour, but you're welcome to type questions into the chat throughout the presentation, and I'll moderate asking those questions when we get to the Q&A. Thanks, Molly and Candise, for being guinea pigs for this first webinar, and please take it away.
Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so my name is Molly Gunderson, and I'm going to have the first half of this presentation. So thank you all for joining us. I just wanted to say that we did give a version of this presentation at OLA 3 years ago, and we presented with our colleague Turner Masland, and he's no longer with us in the Oregon libraries. He's in California now, but his presence is throughout this presentation because he did contribute quite a bit to the initial presentation. So I just want to give credit to Turner, who's awesome. All right, so I'm going to talk about critical library management, what we mean. Trying to get to the next slide, thank you. And just to kind of lay out the groundwork for this presentation. So why critical library management? Why is it important? Well, we've heard a lot about critical theory in our profession as it is applied to, say, instruction sessions or cataloging, but it hasn't really been applied to management in libraries so much. Traditional management in both corporations and universities still upholds the hierarchical structure dominated by white men. And this image at the top here kind of illustrates that. Turner did a Google search when we were initially doing this presentation, and this is just an example, but it's actually an entire page of image results for the word manager when you type it in Google. Brings up white men. So I decided to do a Google image search this week to see what the word librarian brings up in a Google image search, and it was a little better. You can see women and people of color. So I just thought that was an interesting image to start off with as we talk about these things. So managers decide who to hire, they create policies, they write performance evaluations, and they make decisions about the strategic direction the library will go. So if we start to challenge the norms and break down conventional power structures, we can move toward a new understanding of how we manage our libraries and our departments. So I was in the public administration graduate program about 10 years back here at Portland State, and we learned in that program that management is getting things done through other people. And when I heard that definition at the beginning of the program, I was like, I would say that management is getting things done with other people. So that's my management philosophy. Basically, guiding and pitching in, not giving orders or making unilateral decisions. So critical theory then can be applied in how we manage our employees, how we interact with our patrons, in the decisions we make when purchasing materials, supplies, and even furniture in our libraries, and when we make plans involving the effective use of space in the library. So each of the topics that we address in this webinar could be its own individual webinar, but Candice and I are going to try to capture as briefly as we can the things that we think are important when we talk about ourselves as managers. And obviously these values carry over in our personal lives as well. So what do we mean when we say critical theory? Well, critical theory is a framework for understanding social structures and social phenomena through the struggle between domination and liberation. Critical theory combines a number of different theories that have blossomed starting in the early 20th century, takes an in-depth look at who holds the power in our society. It really begins with class theory, with industrialization and the means of production, which created power imbalances between, for example, factory owners and the working class. And then we moved through post-colonial theory, which examines the consequences that imperialism had on native populations. And then critical race theory, feminist theory, and queer theory sort of followed and continued to build on and challenge these social roles, inequalities, and injustices that people who were pushed to the edges of society had to live with every day. So when it comes to critical library management, this means we combine the ideas of social justice, critical theory, and our professional ethics as librarians in our daily work. So we'll have some specific examples of how we do this in a minute, but first I'd like to address the myth that people have about libraries, maybe not us here in this room or this webinar, but I still hear it today, is that libraries are neutral spaces. So when I think of the word neutral, this is what comes to mind, sort of a boring, blah, grayish sort of image. Because if we really think about it, libraries have never been neutral. I have some examples here of how libraries aren't neutral. Two, I kind of started out with the negative, so I'm sorry about that. But libraries in the United States were segregated until the 1960s. There's the hierarchical classification system that we still live with today, and it's full of outdated terms. Only recently was the term illegal immigrant changed to non-citizen, and that came about because librarians petitioned the Library of Congress for this change. On the other hand, we have many, many positive examples of how libraries are not neutral. Librarians standing up to the FBI and US Patriot Act for their refusal to hand over patron records in 2005. The Baltimore Library staying open during the riots in April 2015 because they recognize the importance of being a community resource. Just this week, I listened to This American Life, and I don't know if anyone else heard it. It was called The Room of Requirement, and it was about libraries. It was a really awesome episode of This American Life. Anyway, in that episode, they had a segment on the library that is on the border of Canada. It spans Canada and the United States. One part is in Vermont and one part is in Quebec. And there it became a meeting place for families separated by the travel ban. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then there's like the basic reason we're here is to offer reliable information in the era of fake news. So then I was thinking about our physical spaces and how that's not really neutral either, because library buildings themselves tend to be very large and imposing, with a huge staircase going up to the entrance, which makes accessible entrances hard to find. In our library, the accessible entrance is around a corner, and even though there's signage, it's pretty small and not very clear about where to go. I did a quick survey before doing this presentation originally about who are libraries in Oregon and Washington named after. Well, the majority of the times it's white rich men, basically, and only 2 women have libraries named after them in the whole system or state. I was looking at Orbis Cascade Alliance libraries mainly. And then in the interior, we have confusing layout. Patrons don't really know where to go. They don't know where the books are. In our library, when you walk in, there's just a wall, so you have no idea what direction to go to even get started. Our reference desk is on the second floor, not the first floor, so it's hard to know where to get help. And our service desks tend to be on opposite floors from where you think they would be, or behind a wall. And then there's the expectation of quiet, which is changing in a lot of libraries, but that makes it kind of intimidating for students who are new and need to know where they can work on a group project. All right. So just thinking about as librarians and librarians who are critical librarians or critical managers, however you want to call yourself, we can still advocate for privacy, fight censorship, empower patrons, and have respect for all of our patrons on a daily basis, however that plays out in your daily life. And so I'm thinking about having respect for our patrons, our students, our staff. It leads to the next topic, which again could be its own presentation. I wouldn't be the person who would be qualified to give that presentation, but at least in summarizing what implicit bias is and why it's important to think about, I just want to go over a few points here. So what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are unconscious attitudes or stereotypes we have towards social groups that affect our actions and decisions in everyday life. These attitudes can come from learned behavior, social media, news headlines, or a childhood experience, but oftentimes the reason is just unknown. Everyone has them whether they realize it or not. Implicit biases are triggered by a rapid and automatic mental association with certain groups. They don't align with our belief system, but can remain in place even if the person explicitly rejects them. Doesn't mean you're racist. Implicit biases remain in place even after the person has rejected it. But there is hope. Implicit biases can be unlearned. We can overcome our biases by recognizing that they exist, by feeling a motivation to change or address these biases head on, and by habitual practices to unlearn these types of biases. So there is a test you can take. I don't know if any of you have heard this, but Project Implicit out of Harvard University created this test in 1998 to uncover people's biases about certain demographic groups. The test takes about 20 minutes to half an hour, and it measures the association between people, say, for example, fat people and thin people. Then it takes evaluations that you have of those people, good or bad, and then the stereotypes associated, either lazy or athletic. And so you're shown images of people along with the words, and you're asked to make choices based on how you categorize the words related to the images. So it requires some hand-eye coordination, and it's actually trickier than it sounds. And the test results are based on how long it takes you to sort the words. So I think these slides will be made available, so the link is right there if you're interested in taking that. And then I linked to two videos, one very short 2.5-minute video that has a good summary of implicit bias. I was thinking of, I just found it this week for this presentation, but I thought it'd be great to show like student employees or new staff, because it's very short and could be incorporated into a training session. For a little more in-depth look at it, there's a TEDx talk by Dishaw Hockett, who is the founder of Safe Places for the Advancement of Community and Equity. And that video is like 12 minutes long. It's a really great summary of implicit bias and how we can overcome them. Okay, great. So now I'm going to talk about some more meaty subject for managers anyway, which is recruitment and retention, and how we can think of critical theory in these areas, critical management. So for hiring and recruitment, obviously we want to hire for diverse candidates. So how do we do that? Here at Portland State with our student employees, we used to, just because we're a big library and we hire a lot of students and a lot of students knew to come ask for us for applications, we didn't really do much in the way of recruitment. But that's changed over the last 3 or 4 years, where we recognized that we wanted to have a more diverse pool of student employees. So we started reaching out to campus groups, such as the Black Student Union, the Queer Resource Center, and then the Multicultural Center. And that's helped a lot. And we have a great pool of students now from all different backgrounds. And since they're at the circulation desk and the technology help desk, and they're walking around helping students with technology issues in study rooms, they're on the front lines, and students who need help are getting helped by students who look like them, have the same experiences as an undergrad as they do, and it's helped with our customer service quite a bit. For staff jobs and for librarian jobs, we post on Craigslist, in neighborhood newspapers like El Hispanic News, and we haven't done this yet, but one idea was to post in community centers, and that way we're not just posting out to that world of academia, get the word out to a different set of groups. And then in hiring, we want to be mindful of inherent structural biases, because we tend to hire those that are like us or look like us. The other word is, or phrase that gets used a lot is, are they a good fit? And what does that mean exactly? Are they fitting into our pre-existing organizational social structure? So you might want to examine that if you're on a search committee that uses that term. And then, are we discouraging people from applying? Online only application process is really limited to those who have access to computers and technology. Especially in academia, we have a very bureaucratic hiring process. It can take months to even get the process going after we've gotten all the applications, because committees are pulled in different directions, the people on committees, and the organizational structure of HR and how things go from department to HR to provost to whoever else. It's just a very long process, and people can drop out of the process along the way. And then asking for things like academic transcripts, pay history, and then requiring massive experience for an entry-level position. Those all cut out segments of the population. So just something to consider when you're recruiting for new hires. Okay, and then I want to talk about supporting your staff once they are here. What we've done for our student workers this past year is to hold resume workshops and talk about career planning with them. So we know that on campus there is a career center that can do this for our students, but it's not really tailored to library work specifically, and a lot of our students are interested in going on to library school or continuing their library work. So we like to tailor it to that rather than just sending them to the career center for some generic advice. I like to offer flexible schedules to both students and staff, and because our library is open many hours during the week, I have that option. I know it's different for a smaller library with shorter hours, but I have staff who like to have a weekday off, who like to sleep in and then come in late, and I just try to make it as easy for them as possible, as long as it fits in with the needs of the department. Along with that, I encourage people to take classes at Portland State or wherever they're interested in learning more, developing more, pursuing another degree, and we can work around that as well. Encouraging a fun work environment. Well, I'm sure every manager thinks, oh yeah, my staff love working for me and my department is super fun. But ours really is. I mean, we have, every month we celebrate birthdays. We we have food for the students a lot, as much as we can, especially during dead weekend finals when that's stressful, and for the students who are working graveyard during our 24/7 hours. We just always try to have food, a lively atmosphere. We're a big department. There's tons of people around all the time. And I've been able to hire over the last few years just the most enthusiastic, friendly staff ever. So it's been really great. And I'm really proud of the department that I've built over the years. And then offering professional development opportunities. Again, this might be harder for some libraries than others, but what I encourage is for my staff to attend conferences. There's the Access Services Conference in Georgia every November that I send my staff to who are interested. And then this past year they offered online access to the conference, so that made it easy. People didn't have to travel. And then there's a good number of conferences that are local, like Northwest ILL and Online Northwest. I encourage them to serve on library committees and also campus-wide committees as they're applicable to the work they're doing. I mentioned taking PSU classes. We have supervisor trainings through our HR department that are really good. And then there's the Willamette Valley Higher Education HR, I forget what the C stands for. That's a horrible acronym, but they offer some really good management trainings as well. And then micro-learning opportunities, which Candice, do you want to mention what that is?
Yeah, so micro-learning is basically, instead of having like a larger, maybe day-long training or even like an hour or 2-hour block trainings, it's kind of meeting, especially younger people, like where they are at. So something that they can do on the go, like maybe on their phone. Maybe it only takes like 5 or 10 minutes. So we're talking about like smaller modules that they can complete. And that can look a lot of different ways. You know, it could be videos or online modules. But for my library, one thing that we like to do is if I find information in the field, I'll just send it out and be like, okay, I want everyone to, so one thing was about using non-gendered language in the library. So there was an article from a library staff member at Seattle Public Library about this, and so I shared it with all of my staff. And it's like, you know, this article will only take you about 5 minutes, but I want you to just like reflect on it, and then, you know, that's it. I'm not going to quiz you about it, but please take the time to do that. And actually, a lot of people came back to me, even though I didn't require this, and was like, thank you for making me read that. That was actually really good, and it was really helpful. But those are just kind of like tiny learning opportunities.
Great. Yeah. Okay, and then advocating for our students. This kind of goes along with students who come in the library to study and also our student employees. So we give them access to technology. At the circulation desk, we have laptops to check out and phone chargers. We have headphones. So you would think that, wait, don't students already have those things? But they certainly do not, because those are the 3 most popular checkouts, along with study rooms, that we have going on in the library right now. Textbook purchasing is a new thing for us. Within the last 2 or 3 years, we've been taking the list of the classes that have the highest enrollment, and then we purchase the textbooks for those classes. I should say a lot of the departments already give us textbooks every year, every term already, which is nice. So like the math department and biology always bring us their textbooks. But for those that we don't have, we will purchase. And it's a way of knowing that at least we're reaching some of the students and helping them out with their you know, college spending levels. I wish we could buy textbooks for every class, but you know, maybe somewhere down the road we'll get donor funding for that. We do have a donor who has given us money to purchase every single art history textbook, which is great because those are huge and they're expensive. We did away with library fines for PSU books a few years ago. we just did a cost-benefit analysis and decided that, well, it's not really worth it to spend so much time and energy dealing with library fines when we can just, we'll bill them for the lost book if it doesn't come back. And that's been really great. We partner with the Disability Resource Center in offering accessible laptops. We purchased a graphing calculator at their recommendation that actually speaks. So if a blind student needs to use a graphing calculator, it's very easy to use. And then we're offering Braille printing this coming year. I don't know exactly when it's going to be set up. I know the Braille printer has been purchased. We just need to know where I'm going to stick it in the library. And then we try to stay informed of campus and community resources for students who are hungry, who are dealing with mental health issues, who are struggling to stay in school, sometimes all three at the same time, and so that we can refer them. And there is now a pantry on campus that's open a few hours a day where we can send students, so that's been great. Okay, and then I just want to talk about other ways we can advocate real quick. I'm thinking about, lately I've been thinking about universal design principles. I'm on the campus-wide committee for PSU about accessibility on campus. And so we're talking a lot about this as well, campus-wide, but it's nice to think about for libraries as well. So universal design principles were created in 1997 by a group of architects, engineers, and environmental design researchers. This was out of North Carolina State University. Is to create spaces and environments that all people could use and feel comfortable in. There are 7 of these design principles, but I pulled out just a few of them for this presentation. The first is equitable use, meaning the library can be used by everyone equally, obviously. And an example of this is what I was talking about before with that grand entrance with the big staircase. Maybe there are better ways of designing a building that's easy for most people to get in the building. An entryway that could be accessible by everyone, one level, no staircase. And then the second design principle that I want to talk about is flexibility and use, which is for the purpose of a library. For our purposes, could be like a scanning station located at an adjustable height table that moves up and down so that it could be used by someone standing or someone in a wheelchair. Classroom tables in those big lecture halls always have the right-handed pull-down table, and I'm left-handed, so that's always annoying. That's just a little example. And then the third example is low physical effort. It's another important principle for libraries because ideally they would be set up to be used comfortably and efficiently with a minimum amount of fatigue. I don't know how we can solve the problem of pulling big books off a high shelf, but if someone has a problem with that, at least for now, they can ask a staff person. Maybe someday we'll have robots or something that will help out with that. But door handles are a good example too. So by replacing a traditional knob that you grasp and turn with your wrist, you could just have push button or a push bar that you can open and go through easily. And then finally, the size and space for approach and use. That's a feature that allows for an adequate amount of space for everyone to use. So clear, wide pathways from one end of the building to another, counter heights at service desks for people standing and people seated in wheelchairs. Our reference desk on the second floor was redesigned a number of years ago to have the high, traditional counter level standing and talking to the reference librarian that way, but then we cut it in half and had a shorter sit-down station for people who want to approach and sit and talk to a librarian. Okay, and then we've made an effort recently in library at Portland State to provide spaces for everyone. So we have all gender restrooms on the 3rd floor, which are conveniently located next to the family-friendly study room. That means, you know, if a father is there with his young daughter, they can go into the family or to the all-gender restroom and not worry about being separated there. That's an example. We have on the same floor around the corner now a lactation station, and then we're starting to build out prayer and meditation rooms on campus, and we'll have one in the library on the 5th floor. To prepare for that, we installed foot washing stations in the restroom that will be around the corner, so people can wash and get ready to pray in the meditation and prayer room. And then finally, since we've addressed inclusivity involved in the physical layout of the building, I just want to quickly talk about the importance of making sure our online presence is accessible. So I'm just mentioning quickly WCAG standards, which is also referred to as WCAG 2.0. These are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So the technical standards for creating an accessible website so that can be viewed by people with blindness or low vision, limited movement, or learning disabilities. So these include simple things like making sure images are labeled with alt text, keyboarding functionality to navigate the website rather than having to use a mouse, having the right color contrast between text and the background to make sure content is easy to read. So that by following these recommendations, we can ensure our website can be viewed by the majority of people who visit us online. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Candise.
Cool. So I wanted to just start with this quote from William Kim, who says, "Sometimes saying isn't much, but right now, saying it aloud can mean everything. If you support those who belong to minority groups but don't say it aloud, how would they know it?" And so this is something I really started thinking about when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened. So that was something that had affected my community, and I felt that very strongly. I just remember being in shock and crying a lot. And the Monday after that happened, I came into work, and I just felt devastated. And I remember actually one of my student workers, who was a gay man, just like holding him at the front desk together and crying because it was such a big deal for us. And I kind of just like walked around in a haze that day, but there was one thing that like really stood out to me, and that was the lack of any communication from our administration about the event. And so I felt traumatized, but what felt worse was thinking that other people, and especially like my supervisors and administrators, felt like this was just any other day. And so I called out our then president and our director of communications, and I was like, "This is a problem." And they were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." And they, you know, put out a statement and all of that stuff. But the bottom line is this: when people are hurting, they shouldn't have to ask for support. They shouldn't have to ask to be recognized. That should just be given to them. So after this event, what I also realized was Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, the Black community had been going through this longer than libraries have been around, right? So one thing that I think that we can do is for administrators and managers to explicitly state our support and say that we stand with groups, especially groups who are experiencing hatred and violence. This is something that, let me go on to this. This is something that, you know, upper level administrators should be doing, is addressing the entire community. But even managers of small teams can do this. So crafting more personal messages to your staff just to assuage some of those fears. So this is an example that I really like from the president at MIT. And he says, "We cannot stand as observers and accept the future of escalating violence and divisiveness. I believe our leading civic institutions have a responsibility to speak clearly against those corrosive forces and to act practically to inspire and create positive change." And I really liked his statement as well because it tied in the specific skill set and the values of the MIT community. So actually looking at what they have to give and what they can do to change this. And speaking of physical safety, I wanted to just briefly touch on the topic of safe spaces. So we've all heard this phrase being used, but what is a safe space? And when we talk about safe spaces, the safe space for who? So when, it's a good story, when Trump was elected into office at my college, an email went out to all of the faculty from Ocon's then president, and it's the same president from the last example I gave. And she asked all faculty to be aware of how Trump supporters might be feeling marginalized during this time. And so Ocon in general is a pretty left-leaning small college, or I mean, at least the liberals are the loudest. And a student had apparently voiced concerns to the president because they overheard a faculty member talking with students during the break about how they all hated Trump. And they felt really uncomfortable by the situation. So when we talk about safe spaces, does that mean safe space for all? And how can we even manage that? So I just found this tweet a couple of weeks ago, but I really liked it. This person says, "We love to say all are welcome, but we often lack the power analysis that would tell us if some people are present in the space, other people are inherently unsafe and therefore not truly welcome. No matter how many times we insist they are welcome, it's a hollow promise." So when we talk about hatred and violence targeted towards people of a specific race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender expression, allowing people who practice violence against those groups into our space inherently makes it unsafe for those people. And you might have heard some news about this as well. Libraries, especially those serving the general public, are especially grappling with this question in regards to group meeting spaces. So last year, the ALA had created an updated policy about meeting rooms, but then quickly rescinded that policy because the internet collectively freaked out about it. Because it stated that hate groups, specifically used the word hate groups, were allowed to use public meeting rooms. So the newest revision is supposed to be voted on soon, unless it's already been voted on. I'm not part of that process. But the conversation is far from over around this. But really this gets at some bigger ethical questions that we have around librarianship and the libraries for one society, right? So do we implicitly accept hate and bigotry in our libraries while maintaining to hold lip service to having safe spaces? Or do we stand up and say, you know, we vehemently oppose hate groups, but in that process indicate that the First Amendment doesn't apply to hate speech? So, I mean, for me personally, I would be down with the second one, but it's a conversation that not all librarians agree upon, and it's going to take a lot of time and discussions to figure that out. So how do we create systemic change? This is a big question, and one thing that I think about a lot, a question that I have to grapple with a lot, is how do we best support our communities? And by communities, I mean both our patrons and our staff who have been ravaged by systemic poverty, by racism, disabilities, hatred, violence, chronic pain, natural disasters. How do we create change to make our libraries truly equitable spaces and advocate for our people? So systemic change does not begin and end with diversity. Social justice work in libraries is often viewed as kind of side projects. So it's not like the real work that we do. Often this plays out in like diversity displays and library-sponsored events that highlight diversity. But here's the thing that we all know. Diversity does not solve the problems of institutional racism. So Obama was our president for 8 years, and I think that we can all agree that racism is alive and very much thriving in the United States. Now, that being said, I don't want to discredit the power of those kinds of diversity projects. There definitely is power in seeing yourself reflected in library collections, in library staff. That is powerful. But what I do want to clarify is that hiring librarians of color isn't radical. Hiring transgender librarians is not radical. Creating displays that showcase queer love stories is not radical. That's like the base minimum of what we should already be doing. So when I talk about social justice work and library management, it's not just ensuring that our workplaces are diverse, but that people from historically marginalized groups have power and support so that their voices are heard, they're not gaslighted when they bring up issues in our organizations, and that they have the opportunity to lead. So this means working towards creating the culture so that people don't just feel accepted into our libraries and work environments, but they help actually build and create that culture, and that they see themselves reflected in it. And that's a really big difference. So how do we do this, right? It's a great question, and one that I obviously don't have all the answers to. And I'd actually love to hear your guys' thoughts in a bit. But first, I'll share what I think are some just basic ways that we can use policy and planning to do some social justice work. So as managers, one thing that we can actively control is the creation of a work environment that supports our staff and our patrons, and specifically in doing social justice work. So if we're serious about creating systemic change, managers, we have to recognize our positions of power in the organization. We do have power. And we have to be able to make sure that we have a commitment to making sure that our staff have the tools and the support and the financial ability to be able to do this kind of work, that it's prioritized and that it's funded. So mission statements, this is kind of, for me, I think this is like the low-hanging fruit. Though they're often neglected. Mission statements, they tell the world like not just who we are, but who we want to be. So I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at your mission statements, especially if it hasn't been looked at in a while, because I'm sure that your values might have changed since then. You can try to use, so you want to explicitly state that your organization is anti-racist, use anti-racist language. And mission statements are not just for larger overarching organizations. They can be for smaller departments as well. So and individual departments can craft statements that help tie in their values with the work that they want to accomplish. So This is OCOM's mission, part of our mission statement that we did just a couple of years ago. And I'm not going to go into that one because I want to show you guys the next one, which I think is much more interesting. So one development that I've seen lately is people actually adding diversity statements within their mission statement. And so this example is from the University of Washington, Tacoma, and it's from their Teaching and Learning Center. So this is a department, it's not the entire organization. And they have a statement on anti-racist and social justice work in the Writing Center. So they're tying that into the mission of what they're doing. The next thing I want to talk about is equity and inclusion initiatives. This is kind of our strategic planning, right? So these can help us look at ways to create more inclusive environments. So this includes not just like making sure like our workspaces are inclusive and diverse, but that they're accessible to all users. So some of the things that the actual action plans that Molly was talking about, this is help to build that into a larger action plan that supports those kinds of assignments. So, and as Molly touched on, when we talk about hiring and retaining staff, having policies in place to help us check our privilege and our biases are really important for all of us, no matter how like woke we think that we are. We need those kind of policies to make sure that there are checks in place. Oh, and one thing that should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that if you're a white library manager, don't ask the one person of color in your organization to lead the equity and inclusion initiative. It's not the job of people of color to educate white people. So if people of color want to work on that, and that's really great, but don't just assume that they want to be your educator and savior. So this is Iowa State University's diversity plan for 2018. And it's actually quite a long plan. So I just pulled out one of their strategies and some of the action items around that. And this one is specifically around staff awareness of cultural values, diversity, inclusion, and how personal bias can impact the work environment. And so it's focusing on making sure that staff is educated about this kind of information and doing diversity training around that. And so they have a list of actions that they think will help them meet their goals. And then creating open dialogue. Tone policing is first off something that I wanted to comment on. Tone policing towards people of color is a very real thing. So as Molly said, libraries are quiet, right? They're modeled on a white patriarchal ideal of like what it means to be an academic. And that includes being quiet, working alone. And so when minorities speak up in this profession, they're often labeled as rabble-rousers or that they're overreacting. And I mean, I have a friend who spoke up on a listserv who was dismissed as a troll. So that's a real thing that happens. And so within our organizations, creating a safe space for people to voice concerns and dissent without fear of reprisal is a very good idea. So I have a really small library staff. It's about 18 people, and most of those are student workers. And the college in general is very small. So people might feel uncomfortable talking to me about things, sometimes things that I might have said or done, or other times things that have gone on in the library or the way that our services are set up, because they don't want to offend me. Like that's how small our institution is. So So I created this online form that I sent out for our staff periodically, and it allows them to anonymously talk to me about things, and I tell them, please talk to me about this in person if you feel comfortable. If you don't, use this, and I won't try to figure out who you are. And when I first implemented this, I got this email that I thought was really wonderful, and the person said, by the fact that you thought to create a form, it probably means it will be unnecessary to use, but the fact that it's there makes me feel secure, safe, and appreciated. And so I thought that was very nice of them to say. But also anything we can do for our workers, especially support staff, to make them feel safe, secure, and appreciated, I think is worth it. And so I'm going to end on this. This is a quote from Carla Hayden, Librarian of Congress, and she was talking about the Ferguson libraries staying open during the riots. And she says, earlier this week, the director of Ferguson Library called, where they had also stayed open through the protests. And they said, it's critical to have your administrators ready to go to the sites and be backup for the regular staff. You may not be fighting, but you're in the fight. Recognize that you have to think of yourself as that anchor. Things will follow after that. So I really love this quote because we all want to do good, but good intentions don't create change. We have to actually create change. We as managers have to do that. Our staff have to do that. Our patrons, our colleagues. And so this means that we have to really work at creating systemic changes so that we as managers can be the anchor for our staff in helping to create equitable libraries. So that is the end of my part of the presentation. Do you have anything to follow up before we open up?
No.
Okay. So sorry we went a little bit longer than we had planned, but hopefully we can open this up for people to talk maybe about some strategies that you already do in your library, or if you have questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, you all. We've got a couple of questions that came in. One was, Serenity was asking about, can you share the citation for that article by the author at SPL? I think was that about microlearning, is that right?
Mm-mm.
Oh.
SPL. Oh yeah, I can share that.
Was it
yeah,
gendered language? Or sorry, I might have missed where the context.
Yeah, non-gendered language, is that right?
Awesome. Yes.
Yeah, and I actually put together, I compiled that article with another thing that gives kind of a general background about gendered language stuff, kind of stuck it together in a PDF, so I'd be happy to share that.
Awesome. I can send it to everyone with the recording and the evaluation. All right. Trying to think. Oh, let's see. Oh, Teo was asking, have any of you heard of lactation rooms being available for public use in libraries? And I know I've seen them at universities and colleges, but I've never seen libraries that specifically have a lactation room, which is awesome to do that.
Yeah. The funny thing is we don't even know who uses it. It's up on the 3rd floor, and there's a code that's given to students who request it through the Women's Resource Center. It's not managed by the library, so I have no idea if it's being used or not. I was going to check in with the Women's Resource Center this term to see if they've gotten any feedback about it.
Oh, that is so cool. I really like especially the privacy aspect of that, because I think so many women feel like when they have to ask for any sort of accommodation, it's so, I don't know.
Or it's just awkward to ask for the key at the circulation desk. So yeah, I'm glad they set it up that way.
That's terrific. Any other questions from folks, you can either type in the chat or unmute your mic and ask a question. Well, while people maybe are typing or whatever, I just wanted to say I really appreciated how much you all focused on work environment, because I mean our profession talks a lot about like a problem with diversity recruitment, but we also have this insanely big problem with attrition because of the way people of color are treated in their places of work, and because libraries just are, you know, based on white patriarchal values, and we can be so unconscious of that sometimes. So I really appreciated like the concrete suggestions.
Thank you.
Here's a question from Serenity again. Oh, wait, and one from Jane as well. How have y'all updated signage in your library to be more inclusive? Example, multiple languages, icons, etc. Any brilliant suggestions?
This is something that we struggle with at Portland State a lot at our library, because we have, I'll just say it, certain administrators who don't like signage in the library or don't like things on walls. So we're kind of going through an overhaul in our signage and how we will be displaying things soon. However, we do have, from the accessibility committee that I'm on, that's campus-wide, we have new signage in the library by the elevators that show how to, encouraging people who are getting on the elevators to make way for people who have walkers, canes, children. And it's kind of a funny sign because it's trying to include everybody who might need to get in the elevator before you. But that's just one example of a sign that we're trying to incorporate around campus that makes people think for a second, oh, maybe it's not me first. But yeah, signage is definitely something that we're going to be working on in the coming year. We have a space planning committee, and that the signage will probably come out of that. And I'm on that committee, so I have lots of ideas.
Well, I would love to hear them once you're done.
Awesome. Another question, how much institutional buy-in or support did you, just scrolled off my screen, sorry. Did you need to make certain changes, Molly and Candice, or did you just like do these things?
For me at OCOM, I can mostly just do things because we're a pretty small school and there's less bureaucracy than you would have at a larger institution where you might have to go get approval for a lot of things. So most every change that we do at OCOM Library, I can just kind of be like, hey staff, do you want to do this? Let's run with it. The only thing was the mission statement. So something that, you know, is going to be, the creditors are going to see and we're going to put on the website. That had to be, our board of directors had to approve that. But that process, we had a committee that had students and staff and people, non-library people, helping out with that. So.
Yeah, in my department and in my library, I feel like everyone that I work with, from administrators to librarians to staff, they're all very concerned about students first and inclusivity. So it doesn't take a lot of convincing to make these kinds of changes.
I will say though, as a smaller institution, some of the things that I was talking about, so like inclusivity and equity initiatives, we don't have at the college. We don't have any kind of committee that covers that. I mean, we have about 200 FTE students. And that's something that I have talked with administrators about, and they've been kind of like, oh, we'll just, wait until this person comes on. Like, we're going to be hiring for this. Maybe they'll have some ideas. So getting that going on the larger institution scale has not been successful, but it is something that I think that I am going to just be writing into the library's strategic plan so that I don't have to wait for other departments to jump on board.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's always wait till that person gets onboarded, and then it's all going to be, and it never happens. One last question. This is from Gabriella. Do you have suggestions on what you'd like to see from librarians or other sort of middle tier people in the library structure between student workers and the managers to support your efforts?
Oh, good question.
I don't. I mean, for my own, well, I mean, it's hard because I have a small staff as well, but I mean, for me, I think that people being supportive of trying new things is the only thing that I really require, and I think that it's my job to kind of just ensure that people are able to do this kind of work if they want to do it. Yeah.
Try new things. That's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think these things require a lot of flexibility.
Yeah,
certainly.
definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to the webinar today. I'll send out probably on Monday, as I said, the information from Candise, the evaluation, and a link to the recording for folks who couldn't be here. Thanks to both of you, Molly and Candise, for this amazing presentation. This was such a great start to this project. So,
Great. Thank you, Meredith.
All right. Have a great rest of your afternoon and a great weekend, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Bye.